The world is changing faster than ever.
America first.
But what do these unpredictable times mean for Britain?
The world runs on a set of rules. Russia is breaching those rules.
Do we still have power and influence?
How do we continue to engage with a government that has been responsible for clearly very significant atrocities?
Some of the answers lie inside one British institution, the Foreign Office. In a year of unprecedented turbulence, we've been given privileged access behind the scenes.
Welcome, Michael. Please come in.
In London and across the globe, to the strange and fascinating world of British diplomats.
Like, if I went back and told my 16-year-old self, like, you're a diplomat based in New York, I would just die.
What do diplomats actually do? And how does that affect Britain and our place in the world?
Diplomacy is the art of letting other people have your way.
The Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the FCO, at the centre of Whitehall, and formerly at the centre of the British Empire.
Theresa May still in office, but just how much power does she have? The election she called that she promised not to delivered not the thumping majority she sought, but in fact, no majority at all.
Politicians come and go, but civil servants remain.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to colleagues tuning in from all over the world.
Today, the civil servant-in-chief, the permanent secretary, Sir Simon MacDonald, is addressing his staff.
British politics moves swiftly. So the first person the Prime Minister asked to come back to the government was the Foreign Secretary. Please welcome Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, in the immortal phrase of the Emperor Hirohito, matters have evolved in British politics not necessarily to the advantage of the Conservative Party, but we have a fantastic opportunity now to do more, and to do it in, if I may say so, in a slightly different way, because
the Foreign Secretary is the public face of Britain abroad. But it is these people who are the experts, who work at the diplomatic coalface and actually carry things out.
Clearly, one of the things we need to do, is to get our Russia policy right. I think we've done an awful lot of beware, but not much engage. Anybody agree with that? We need to be engaging with Tehran. I hope to do a trip to Iran fairly soon. We clearly have a big opportunity in the Gulf. That is what I mean by global Britain. It's not just a question of me endlessly banging on as I do about the number of Harry Potter books we sell in China. It's about the skill and the expertise of you guys and of the Foreign Office, solving problems and doing good by bringing our expertise to bear. And let's also have some fun while we're doing it. Thank you very much.
Built in the middle of Queen Victoria's reign to reflect Britain's status as the most powerful nation on earth, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is the hub that links the UK to all corners of the world. Sir Simon is at the top of a pyramid of 14,000 staff.
What is the definition of a good diplomat? I'm going to get it wrong in my quoting, but an ambassador is sent abroad to lie for his country.
It's interesting you should ask that, because I am sitting in front of the portrait of the man who said this. And so in the PUS's office, many things have changed over many years, but one portrait has always been here, and that is the portrait of Sir Henry Wotton, who was a British ambassador in the 17th century. And he is the man who said in Latin, an ambassador is an honest man sent abroad to lie for the benefit of his country. This was a triple entendre. Lying in the 17th century meant lying about and lazy. Lying also meant deceiving. But thirdly, lying meant sleeping around. And it was this third interpretation that got him into trouble with the king and lost him his job temporarily. But the thing about a good diplomat is there's always work later, so he was reinstated. The British role in the world has changed fundamentally in the last 150 years. Until the First World War, you could make a case that the UK was the single most important player, full stop. We had the biggest empire with most subjects, we had the largest economy, we had the largest navy, but then things changed very rapidly. In the First World War, we fought with allies, and we won only because of allies. By the end of the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union were the predominant players, and the UK already had to adjust itself to that new reality. 70 years later, we are still in that second group of countries, globally active, influential with the two biggest players, but are not able to do very much just by themselves.
The United Nations, the place where diplomats from 193 countries thrash out global problems. Its objectives include protecting the environment, promoting human rights, but above all, maintaining international peace and security. Every year, for 1 week in September, world leaders gather at the UN General Assembly for a powwow, and New York becomes the center of the diplomatic world.
I pray God to inspire us to make sure that all of you do the right thing for acting together to be able to have the better world that the people we serve needs.
The branch of the Foreign Office here is the UK's permanent mission to the UN, known as UCMIS. For the civil servants here, it's going to be an extremely busy week, servicing the 9 visiting UK ministers who will all be wanting FaceTime with their opposite numbers for high-level diplomatic horse trading. Junior diplomat Harriet O'Brien is one of the 2 coordinators for the week.
So how do you find living in New York?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's New York, so before I applied to the job here at UCMIS, I applied to a job in Islamabad, and I was also really keen to go to Tehran. And I had a bit of a culture shock, I think, when I got here, because I wasn't expecting it. The Foreign Office really prepares you if you go somewhere like Pakistan. You learn the language, and you really think a lot about the different culture and how you need to adapt. Whereas in New York, you don't. And I got here and I had did have a little bit of a shock. New York is a bit shouty sometimes.
And you're not?
No. I went to state schools in London and dropped out when I was 16. If I went back and told my 16-year-old self, you're a diplomat based in New York, I would just die.
Normally, Harriet works on poverty and development issues. Her colleague Shania is an expert on the Yemen.
Every time I come into work, and I've been here 3.5 years, I feel so overwhelmed with pride. It's just such an amazing feeling. It's the feeling that you're a part of history and you're at the centre of something extremely important.
You think it is important what you do?
Of course. Not just what I do, but what the UN does. The UN deals with some of the trickiest problems in the world, and it does make a difference.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. And I think it's also what the UN stands for. So it was set up after World War II to make sure an atrocity on that scale could never happen again. And actually, we haven't had that kind of scale
succeeded.
Of war since then. So, yeah, super important.
As President of the United States, I will always put America first. Just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first.
Britain remains a very important player at the UN. Of the 193 member states, only 5 have a permanent seat on the Security Council. The US, Russia, China, France, and the UK, reflecting the major victorious powers at the end of World War II, when the UN was founded. The UK mission is 5 blocks from the UN.
Yeah, I think apart from the Foreign Secretaries programme where there's a lot up in the air, I think we're all actually on track.
Harriet and Shania's boss is the British ambassador or permanent representative to the UN, Matthew Rycroft. Over his career, he's advised some very powerful people.
Is that you playing football with Tony Blair?
It is. That was at the G8 summit, along with, I seem to remember, Berlusconi, who was head of the Italian delegation, and Schröder from Germany. And we were going to have a sort of mini World Cup, but the others chickened out, so we ended up having sort of Brits against Brits. And I think I was playing against Tony Blair, at least that's what it looks like from that photo. When the US had the presidency of the Security Council, they took us all down to Washington, and we all had individual photos with the President of the United States.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question which you have to give a diplomatic reply to, but what's Donald Trump like?
He was a very good host, and he talked us through the US approach to the UN and to multilateralism, which was that the UN needs reform. It's full of potential, but it needs to get its act together, and that's I very much agree with that.
Although it can claim to have helped prevent World War, that doesn't mean there aren't major disagreements between member states. And it's Matthew's job to lead the fight on behalf of the UK.
The US, the UK and France are the most active. The Russians and the Chinese are absolutely crucial, but obviously we don't agree with them on everything. In fact, we are at loggerheads on several important issues in the Security Council, and we have a fundamentally different view, particularly from Russia, on the value of the whole international system. The world runs on a set of rules, and the UN is at the heart of those rules. The UN Charter really is the embodiment of those rules. And I mean, sadly, for the people of Syria and many other countries, Russia is breaching those rules.
From the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko in London in 2006 to the annexation of the Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, the UK and its allies have long been at loggerheads with Russia. Now, one area of Russian behaviour in particular is outraging the West. Their heavy military support of President Assad in Syria.
This is what happened as diplomacy stuttered. Russian jets with their Syrian allies were in action.
At Matthew Rycroft's official residence, just up the river from the UN headquarters, the wheels of diplomacy are beginning to turn. He's hosting a private breakfast to brief the Foreign Secretary, who flew in last night.
We're looking good. This is the biggest ambition ever that we've had, at least in the time that I've been here. Most of the delegation is here. The Prime Minister is arriving this evening.
Top of the agenda today is the fact that Russia has requested money from the West to rebuild Syria as the war continues. And the UK and its allies must respond. The civil servants advise the elected politician on what to say.
We can use it as it's an opportunity for us because the Russians want something from us for a change on Syria. It's normally the other way around. Yeah. We can insist there has to be humanitarian access, and we can say there must be independent monitoring of the ceasefire, and we can make clear that we won't be giving lots of aid and reconstruction to the Syrian regime until there is a political transition.
Is this, at some stage we're going to have to accept our plan, which was Assad must go, has totally failed. Yeah. What are we saying now, that we want to backload the departure of Assad?
I think the right line is to say by the end of the transition, Assad should have gone, will have gone.
By the end of
what the Russians need to understand is that we are not writing a blank check for reconstruction for a country they have destroyed.
Exactly. No, sure, but the question is going to be,
can we envisage any kind of investment in the rebuilding of Syria whilst Assad is on the throne?
Well, I think you turn that question round and you say we don't think that's the test. The test is there a political process that will address Syria's long-term problems that led to this crisis in the first place? If there is, then we, Britain, will be ready to play our part. But there's no point putting money in while the fighting is still at this level and the Russians are being cynical in trying to get Western money for a country that they have ruined.
The Foreign Secretary has only 30 minutes for his head-to-head with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Nice to see you. The Duma. The Duma. Fantastic. The Duma. Yeah, Duma you stole.
So, Boris. How are you?
I'm well.
Apart from the handshake, for the Russians, it has to be behind closed doors. In the end, Russia didn't get what they wanted. The UK and other powers refused to cough up for reconstruction in Syria. But nor did they reverse Russia's support for Assad. In a restricted part of the UN garden, a moment for the Foreign Secretary to have a quick lunchtime catch-up with his team.
The luxury of this picnic should not be exaggerated. You do not think that the Foreign Office, pushes the boat out like this normally. Normally it's strictly, one very curly old sandwich per head.
And does Ungar, with everybody here rushing around?
Look back on Ungar. Yeah, everybody compares it to all these other great big international junkets like Davos and so on and so forth, but it is different in the sense that what is happening here is active diplomacy, the reconciling of different positions, bargaining, trading, trying to find a common way forward. It's a prism through which lots of different beams and shades of opinion are focused and contracted in an ideal world down to one way forward. As they say, a reductio ad unum, with a capital U, capital N.
With your bilateral with Minister Lavrov, how's that going?
Well, one of the paradoxes of this whole business of diplomacy is that the interpersonal relations can often be much better than the diplomatic relationship between the two countries. I mean, the fact is that Britain and Russia at the moment have a very difficult relationship. And yet Sergei Lavrov is an engaging guy. You've got to be very careful with him. But, my personal relations with him are not bad. And I don't think that is any defect in our approach.
While the Foreign Secretary keeps dialogue open, his Prime Minister publicly holds the Russians to account.
I'm proud that we have used the full weight of our diplomacy to ensure that we have not had to exercise our veto in a generation. But others have not done so. One country in particular has used its veto as many times in the last 5 years as in the whole of the second half of the Cold War. As a result, in Syria, the United Nations has been blocked. This has undermined the values that we hold dear.
But in the chess game that is diplomacy, the UK now needs Russia's support for a resolution it is proposing to the UN's Security Council.
Well, I'm but they're pretty keen on terrorism, so they sort of see this as a terrorism resolution. We're trying to get a Security Council resolution adopted, allowing the Security Council to set up a team, an investigative team, to go into Iraq and collect and preserve evidence of Daesh atrocities. And by atrocities, we mean war crimes, crimes against humanity, and potentially genocide, so that it can be used for prosecuting members of Daesh, not only in Iraq, but hopefully worldwide. In the UK, for example, if a UK national has gone to Iraq, committed these kinds of acts, and comes back to the UK, then we can prosecute that individual for war crime.
I think I can see it's a standoff, but I think given that we've used this language before, it's agreed language. We're in the end stage of negotiations at the moment, and the Russians and the Chinese are causing a few issues. But we're about to put the text into blue, which is we're about to finalise the resolution before it's voted on, and the Russians and Chinese are threatening not to support the text So we're essentially calling their bluff.
There's a bit of brinksmanship involved, frankly. Sometimes you have to push a point all the way to the end to see where state ends up.
We have to be strong in the council. We have to make our arguments and push quite hard, because if we don't, the Russians will walk all over us.
If the Security Council passes it, this important UK drafted resolution will be binding on all member states.
Yeah, everywhere's locked. But we've got a secret way of...
Usually...
But Shania, we've got the secret way of doing it.
I don't know the secret way. Harriet does. Sneaky, sneaky.
But we've got to be quiet, because we will get caught.
Okay.
The Security Council is the UN's inner sanctum. As one of the 5 permanent members, the UK has certain privileges here, and Harriet knows how to sneak in at night to a room with a view.
We're not really loud in here. So basically, this is the Security Council. Shania, you explain, because you work on the Security Council.
There's the 15 members of the Security Council, the permanent 5, and the other 10 elected members. It's in alphabetical order, and the presidency of the Security Council changes every month. So this month we've got Ethiopia, next month it will be France, and then it basically rotates. When I've written a resolution and it's adopted and all 15 Security Council members put their hands up, it's like the most amazing feeling.
You definitely feel just how influential the UK is because they get a seat at that table, a permanent seat. I think the question for us is that we're not the same country that we were in 1945. Like, we don't have, in some ways we don't have as much influence in the world. So we do, I think, punch above our weight. So you'll see stuff in the media a little bit now after Brexit, should the UK still have a permanent seat on the Security Council, and whether we'll be losing influence by leaving the EU.
How's Brexit affected your work in the General Assembly?
Yeah, it's been really difficult. I think especially working in the EU, where on most things we agree, and actually you become quite good friends with a lot of your colleagues. It's very difficult when you're in a negotiation and you suddenly realise that it's got quite serious and the tone's changed and that you're isolated on an issue. Practically, it means that 2 years since Article 50 was triggered, we will be negotiating by ourselves.
After intense negotiations, Ahila makes final preparations as the UK's resolution on prosecuting Daesh, or Islamic State, is put to the vote. It certainly helps to raise interest in an issue if international human rights lawyer Amal Clooney is involved.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, I'm delighted to have cast the United Kingdom's vote in favour of this resolution. This resolution is a vital step towards achieving that profoundly necessary goal. And as we vote in this chamber, we think of the people who've suffered so grievously at the hands of Daesh, of the innocents whose homelands were overrun.
All Security Council members, including Russia and China, vote in favour.
Excuse us, hello. I'm Michael. So, Amal, I'm going to ask a ridiculous question. Is Ahila a good lawyer?
Oh, there's only one answer. Ahila is a very talented lawyer. She's also extremely hardworking. And, we wouldn't have the resolution that we have today without the commitment of people like Ahila, of Ambassador Rycroft, their personal determination to see it through, and many, many hours speaking just to Victims' Council, let alone all the other states and international stuff.
Thank you. That was a very cheeky question.
It was, wasn't it?
Is there an art to diplomacy?
Yes, because not everybody, I think, can do it or is good at it. But it's not a mysterious art. It's not an inborn talent. It's something that you can get better at. One of the pithiest summaries is that diplomacy is the art of letting other people have your way.
Emrys, have you brushed your teeth? Yes, right, we ready to get ready and go? I'm Her Majesty's Ambassador to Ukraine, but at the end of the day, I'm also Judith Gough, mother, partner, sister, Eurovision fan, all sorts of things that are me, that are not that. It's a challenge, and it affects different diplomats in different ways. I think for me, where you have a partner who also has a career, how you fit that together when my role means that we may change or move countries every 3 to 4 years. It probably has a detrimental effect to her career, and I'm extraordinarily lucky and grateful that my partner is prepared to accompany me on these postings. This is the door. No. Come on, this way. Bye.
I mean, I've been asked before, what's it like being the lesbian ambassador to? And I have to say, actually, I'm not the lesbian ambassador to anywhere. I am an ambassador who happens to be gay, and I also happen to have green eyes and artificially blonde hair, and there are a whole number of characteristics about me, and that is but one characteristic. And I think that's really important, because otherwise you define yourself too narrowly.
How many countries are in the whole world?
Oh, you asked me that question. I think at the moment it's 193 or 4, I think.
When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine re-established itself as a sovereign nation.
In Moscow, President Putin sealed the absorption of Crimea into Russia by signing the legal documents.
When Putin annexed the Crimea in 2014, it was widely condemned as an act of aggression. And Russia is accused of supporting separatists in the east. Judith is heading towards that danger zone in eastern Ukraine, bordering Russia.
We are heading out to Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, which during the conflict in 2014 were actually under separatist control. The reason we're going there is to understand the situation on the ground. Sadly, the conflict continues. We see every week Ukrainian casualties, both civilian and military, and this is a conflict that has now claimed over 10,000 Ukrainian lives.
How are you? Good, I'm good. How was your trip? All right, thanks.
The Russian government continues to claim that its forces had nothing to do with the conflict here. Diplomats need to talk to people on the ground to try to get the real story. And it helps that Judith speaks both Russian and Ukrainian.
Откуда начинались эти все события?
Да.
А события начинались у нас, получается, Славянск, Краматорск. Почему здесь вот это все сильно пострадало? Потому что именно с этого района, с больницы, они производили обстрелы.
А граждане Славянска, они просто там сидели?
Да. Российские войска зашли. Если кто-то говорит, что российских войск здесь нет, мы их сами вот так видели, мы с ними общались реально. И по телефонам, и по радио, и в личном контакте.
Да.
Осенью
Как вам
вот
кажется,
в этом году работали.
мы уже обеспечили медицинскую помощь, как сказать, infantry training, это,
тренировка пехоты.
Пехоты. Что еще вам нужно?
Мы же украинцы, нам надо все.
Back at the United Nations, the General Assembly High-Level Week is in full swing.
More than 400,000 have fled Myanmar, a treacherous escape from burnt-out villages and savage assaults.
Suddenly, a new crisis that the UN has to grapple with. The military in Burma, or Myanmar, have just taken violent action against the Rohingya people, a Muslim minority living in Rakhine State in the west. As refugees flee across the border to Bangladesh, the Unga Week agenda is changing fast.
So Matthew sends his apologies. He can't be here right now because he is at the AOB on Burma in the Security Council, which we called as an emergency, as you know. So there's a few things that have come out of the blue. Burma, the situation there is really deteriorating. It's extremely concerning. We had an emergency Security Council meeting today, and Burma, we're going to be hosting an event which we're putting together at very short notice to try and help address some of the issues there and get the international community together.
In the Security Council, the UK leads on Burma, a former British colony. Following today's very public dressing down of Burma in the emergency session, Ambassador Matthew Rycroft hopes they might have more success if they now use private diplomacy.
I think it's going to be the Burmese ambassador. Hello? Yes. Hello, Ambassador. It's Matthew Rycroft. How are you? You must be very busy. Okay. Well, your country has been getting itself into the news and onto the Security Council agenda, which is not a good place to be. But we are trying to work constructively with the authorities in Rangoon so that we can try to find a way through it. I'm sure you saw what we agreed across the whole of the Security Council the other day. Yeah.
Matthew has already convinced all the major players to attend a confidential working lunch on the Burma crisis. For real progress to be made, he now needs to persuade the Burmese themselves to turn up.
What are your requests? Yeah, I'm looking at the sentence. The crisis is a clear threat to international peace and security. Which bit of that sentence do you not agree with? Right. I mean, I think it is true, that sentence. So but I can see that it makes life harder for your national security advisor and minister to attend if we really emphasise this point. So I think what we'll do is we'll take the sentence out of any future version of this note that we send round. But just so that you know, our national position is that it is a clear threat to international peace and security. Okay, what was your second request? I think that's absolutely fine. We'll call it an informal working lunch. Okay, look forward to seeing you then. Okay, bye. So that was my Burmese colleague, who's not one of my regulars, but obviously has suddenly become important in the last few weeks. So it was very good for me that he said that his national security advisor and his minister were going to come to this lunch, provided we did two things. So that's why he had these two requests. One of them was very easy, which is calling it an informal working lunch rather than a working lunch, and he had some complicated reason why that was important, which was fine. And then the other, as you heard, was he wanted to delete the sentence, the crisis is a clear threat to international peace and security. And for me, I mean, that is such an important part of our position and my position. And so I accepted deleting it only in order to get these people to turn up.
We've arranged the table to enable the best possible conversation, we think. It'll be informal, but of course this is actually something which the Foreign Secretary is very good, is bringing people out, making people feel at ease and helping them to talk.
The UK is hoping that by having everyone closing ranks, including Russia, and most importantly Burma's all-powerful neighbour and usual ally, China, the Burmese will listen.
It's an informal discussion, it's a closed discussion, but it's an opportunity for the international community to talk with Burma in the room. I stress it's closed because this is not meant to be about declaratory, going out there in public and making big and loud points. This is part of I'm afraid, some of the diplomatic arts and tricks. One has to get the right framing in order to have then the right debate.
Do we have some water?
As Jonathan entertains arriving foreign ministers, including the Burmese delegation, the UK host sneaks into a side room to be advised on what exactly to say.
How are you doing? Good, thanks. Nice to see you. Right. Okay, are you going to sort of fill my head with ideas, and is that the plan? Okay.
You have your speaking notes.
So the four key things for the Burmese are you want to secure agreement around the table that they will immediately end the violence and stop military operations against civilians in Rakhine. Secondly, that they will immediately grant UN agencies full humanitarian access to Rakhine. Thirdly, they'll cooperate with the UN fact-finding mission in order to establish the facts on the ground.
A major question is how to create conditions that might make it possible for the refugees to return.
I asked this at breakfast and nobody seemed to know. What are the key things?
So it's about rights for the Rohingya, that they should get their citizenship back, that they should be able to travel.
That's obviously right, yeah.
That they should be able to travel without
they don't have
special
papers,
permission. They had their citizenship taken away about 20 years ago.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
It's pure racism. It is unbelievable. What about sanctions? I was asked about sanctions on the way in.
So that's the same. I mean, that would be a resolution. So
are we going to do sanctions on the way? Poor countries just bloody well emerging from the dark ages.
We need to see step one is the pressure, and if that's responded to, then we take a decision.
We need to find something that's targeted on the military without making life even more miserable for ordinary people.
That's why the ending violence and the humanitarian issue are the real key points to kind of make around this table, because everyone, including the Chinese, including the Russians, can agree on that.
I'm afraid this is, although this is a wonderful gathering, I'm afraid we also have a very, very serious purpose, and I'm pleased to welcome the representatives of Burma's government and indeed everybody who's come, because we all care deeply about that country. On 25th of August, we all, particularly in this room, condemned the attacks on the Burmese security forces, but since then we've been shocked by what has happened, because nearly 400,000 Rohingya have been driven from their homes and forced to flee to refugee camps in Bangladesh. Many of their villages have been razed to the ground. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people have been killed.
The Burma lunch in New York kicks off a series of British diplomatic moves to try to halt the crisis. Britain has been enmeshed in Burma's affairs since before Queen Victoria's reign. After gaining independence from Britain, Burma was ruled by a military dictatorship until 2015, when Aung San Suu Kyi won the first effective democratic election. But she still has to share power with the military, who caused the Rohingya crisis.
I'll start with a brief update. We think that around 650,000 Rohingya have fled Burma. We've got over 1 million in Bangladesh. Cox's Bazar is the largest refugee camp in the world. Good, I see that Rangoon is joining us. Welcome. Over 300 villages burned.
Britain's interests are not only humanitarian. Today, a high-level meeting to tackle the thorny issue of balancing expression of outrage with the desire to trade.
And that's one of the things we're grappling with. It's sort of how do we continue to engage with a government that, at least in whole or in part, has been responsible for clearly very significant atrocities. And the strategy so far is that we do promote economic links, careful economic links, so long as we're confident that the people that we're promoting the economic links with are not involved in what is going on.
I just wanted to reassure ministers have concluded that promoting trade within the right context helps resolve things. So I think that's the angle we've been coming at this from.
Prosperity has always been one of the key tasks of the British government. So one way at looking at our history is that the UK has been active in the world to make the world a safe place for Britain to do business. There is clearly a tension at times between human rights and trade. That some countries with which we want to trade have poor human rights records. Our approach is not to duck that. Our approach is to have an agreement, to seek to trade, but to have a human rights dialogue be part of the relationship.
Having worked in the Foreign Office 20 years, I can still get lost in this building.
Dan Chugg has just been promoted to his first ambassadorial job as the next Her Majesty's Ambassador to Burma.
Who are you going to see today?
So I'm going to see the Permanent Secretary, Sir Simon MacDonald.
The Sir Humphrey of the organisation.
That's right, so he's the boss. He is a very important man in terms of my career, yes. So everybody, I think, gets a little bit nervous when they go and see the PUS, as we call him.
Dan.
Hi there.
Thank you. Welcome, good to see you. Have a comfortable chair.
Thank you. Congratulations. It's a great job, and you're going at a great time. It's a country with which we have special ties, and we think we should be able to have greater influence. We know, of course, and respect, of course, the independence of Aung San Suu Kyi, but she is somebody who knows the UK well, and over her long career has listened. But of course, it is a delicate balancing act. Although I wouldn't say she's there on sufferance, she is always aware of the military, and she can't really move in opposition to the military. And I think that she is looking for understanding of her friends in the international community about the constraints under which she operates. You are the leader in this, but you are also the key role model in the whole mission. So how you behave, how you treat people is very important for the success of the whole post. Hope that doesn't sound too daunting. No, it doesn't. I think the difficulty will be in terms of engaging with the military. We don't want to do anything that shows that we sort of condone their behaviour, but at the same time, I think if we don't have any dealings with them at all, that's not right either, because then how can we influence them? We await your advice, because the ends don't justify the means, but we need to be sometimes more flexible about the means than we first thought. Right. Okay. Look forward to it. Thank you. Bye.
Travel safely.
Thank you.
How should a good diplomat engage and at the same time have integrity?
I do not think engagement implies approval. Engagement is essential to do the job of work. If you don't engage, you don't know what's on the other side's mind. You can't work out how to influence the other side, how to get the other side to do what you want and need.
After senior postings in India and China, Dan has spent the last few months preparing for his first ambassadorial role, including learning Burmese.
How does it feel?
It was great.
10 minutes into being ambassador.
It was great. I've always wanted to drive in a car with a flag flying.
Dan arrives at his home for the next 4 years, the Grand Colonial Residence.
Mingalaba, really nice to see you.
Very nice to meet you again.
Yeah. Hello, Manoa. Thank you. I'm a little bit daunted by the task generally ahead, because there are so many things happening in Myanmar at the moment, and so many things which make it tricky for the British government. But excited because I can't help feeling that Burma's at a bit of a crossroads, and it could go the right way, it could go the wrong way. And so I feel that the British Embassy here and myself, can play a part in that.
Thank you, Bravo Control. I'm reaching Logan to you as well.
I brought my guitar here.
Are you a guitarist?
Yeah. So I did my degree in music, actually, and I then did a master's in pop music. And so that's what I did before I joined the Foreign Office.
Pop music as an academic study?
It's called ethnomusicology. But yeah, it was pop music, and I wrote a 5,000-word essay on the song Wonderwall by Oasis. It's in the British people's interests to be involved here, because where you have failed states is where you have problems for Britain.
You have to look at what happened in Afghanistan to see the impact that it had on the UK in terms of terrorism and in terms of drugs. You now have several 100,000 Muslims who've been pushed out of the country who are sitting in refugee camps just the other side of the border, which is a fabulous breeding ground for terrorism. All these things can play an impact on the UK.
The man is critical in hospital after a suspected poisoning in Salisbury. Sergei Skripal, convicted of spying on Russia for the UK, has been living in Britain for nearly 8 years. Police in protective clothing have sealed the area after the Russian and a young woman were found unconscious on a bench.
The UK's relations with Russia take a dramatic turn for the worse. Within days, the Foreign Secretary hauled in the Russian ambassador for a dressing down. The Foreign Office then expelled 23 Russians accredited to their embassy. Short of breaking off all diplomatic relations, this is as serious a diplomatic response as you can get.
At the Russian embassy, packing may already have started. The government is convinced all those being kicked out are spies and that the hit will hurt.
At the UK mission to the UN in New York, the team have been told to take action to put serious international pressure on Russia.
My recommendation was that we call an emergency meeting of the Security Council to put Russia in the spotlight, to hold them to account, to get them to explain themselves, and crucially also to impose a cost on them for carrying out this attack.
Jonathan Allen has been acting ambassador for just a few weeks.
I give the floor to a representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for arranging this urgent meeting of the Security Council today to give the United Kingdom the opportunity to update Council colleagues on our investigation into a nerve agent attack in Salisbury. Once it became clear to us that the United Kingdom had been attacked, my Foreign Secretary summoned the Russian ambassador and sought an explanation from his government. We have received no meaningful response. It is what Russia does.
They hate being put in the spotlight and they hate being held to account, whether it's for the illegal annexation of Ukraine, whether it's for collaboration with the Assad regime in Syria, or whether it's over the Salisbury attack. So we and our allies are using all the tools at our disposal to put them in the spotlight and to put some pressure on them.
The Russian Federation thinks that it's completely unacceptable to launch unjustified accusations in which it is even difficult for me to comment while using diplomatic vocabulary.
After making Russia look uncomfortable in the Security Council, the UK now needs to up the stakes.
Finally, the Prime Minister's asked for more ideas and more things that we can do. So we fit a couple of those things that come from the paper into that process as well.
Can I just ask, what's the thinking in terms of a second big Security Council meeting? We spoke before,
yes,
didn't we, about once that
so, but
OPCW, you don't want to go into that now?
Yeah.
Do you want to say whatever you want to say, and then you can tell us what we can't use? Just I don't.
Well, I mean, I'm even not supposed to say it in this room. That's the point. That's the point.
In this instance, of course, we've also had to be quite aware of the country we're dealing with, the Russians. So we've been quite careful about how we've communicated. We have not used, sort of mobile phones. We've used mechanisms and systems that we have to protect our information.
In the end, nearly 30 countries took action with the United Kingdom, and 150 diplomats in total from nearly 30 countries and international organizations were expelled. This had not been part of Russia's calculation. Russia suffered a diplomatic defeat.
Do you feel, when you watch the news, you're living the real story?
I have that feeling every night. The issues we deal with are big issues. You know, it's not difficult to interest a dinner party in what I am doing at work. My wife might kick me under the table, not to dominate the conversation, but folk are generally interested in what is happening in the Middle East, or in the relationship with America, or Russia, or China, or climate change, or plastic in the ocean, or modern slavery. And the Foreign Office is engaged, is part of the British story.
Do you tell all to the dinner party guests?
Not at all. I'm a diplomat. Part of being a good diplomat is making people you think they're sharing inner confidence, but when they look back, they actually find it felt interesting, but there's nothing much further to tell.
You've said nothing at all, in other words, of any substance.
They were your words.
Isn't that phrase, that might be your view, I couldn't possibly comment?
Yeah, that was from House of Cards.
What did you think of that as a description of how ministries work?
I think in my experience there's less murder.